neuroscience, classical education, and focusing some of the education in the home around the mother so she can outpour to the children. Today, I sit down with our guest, Megha Lillywhite, to discuss both her scientific background, her expertise, and how she wove that into an autodidactic education that taught her both the fine arts and what she needed to know about the humanities to produce beautiful children's books, works, preschool curriculums, and so much more to come. Megha writes for both adults, for children. She pulls and weaves from her own education, from her own experiences to provide a rich platform of education for the whole family. She sees the mother as a curator of taste and a helpful coach when it comes to helping children develop perception. Those things are the center of a good home. A home that is continuously enamored by the art of learning, and that this is not only an exciting facet of human life, but it is a moral obligation. So sit down with me today for a highly enriching discussion. I absolutely loved having this talk. Megha, thank you so much for joining me today. Tell us a little bit about where you're joining from because you are overseas right now.
Yes, I'm in the rural countryside in Italy right now, and we're staying here for the summer. The weather is gorgeous. We've got olive trees outside, and we're surrounded by beautiful mountains.
Where are you guys typically full time?
So we're from Dubai.
Oh, I see. So how far away is that by plane?
I think that's around 7 or 8 hours.
How did you guys wind up in Italy for the summer?
In the summertime, Dubai is not a very hospitable place for
Right.
playing outside.
Right.
And also, there's also the conflict that started there 2 months ago. And so we were already planning to travel for a bit, but because of the conflict, we decided just to go a bit early.
You're from Canada originally. You're in Dubai, usually full time. Tell us how your marriage materialized and your whole family came to into fruition.
This is possibly this is a good question because the way that our family looks to most people, for example, live full time in Canada or America is kind of crazy. But our love story is very common in a place like Singapore or Dubai because these are like international cities. So I'm from Canada. My parents are Indian, and I was working for an, a group that was defending doctors who were fighting for medical freedoms in Canada during the COVID pandemic. And I was helping to do the medical law behind that because I have a background in medical science and neuroscience. And then I was invited to something called the World Council for Health conference to speak there in England. And I had never been to England before, and I was really excited to go because they have some of the best artwork and museums and historical monuments that I wanted to see. So I booked for to stay for 2 weeks and just see, even though the conference was 3 days. But while I was there, I broke my foot on the third day.
Yeah.
And so I just stayed in Oxford, and I was so upset because it's a walkable town. And I was like, oh, just hang around Oxford. And I posted some pictures of Oxford to my Twitter account. And then someone DM'd me. He said, well, if you can't get into the libraries, I have a library card because I'm an alumnus. And I can get you into any library you want. And so that was obviously my husband. He
The
lured
best
me in
pickup
with
line I think I've ever heard in my
yeah.
life. Phenomenal
And
job.
so
I mean, it would work on a girl. It would
yeah,
work.
it works on a girl like me, medieval library access. And we just had such an amazingly fun time. It wasn't even a date. We were just hanging around old libraries and just having fish chips and just having a good time. And yeah, but then I had to go back home only a few days after that. So I met him on one of my last days there. So I was like, oh, it's gonna fizzle out. But then he flew me out to Paris to meet and then I was to meet his parents and to propose. So that was the second date.
Incredible.
And he took me to Mont Saint Michel, which is in France as well. It's not far from Paris, which is the Disney castle that Disney castles are based off of. So I think he had me clocked from the beginning. I know who she is. This is what she's gonna like. So yeah. And then he came all the way to Canada, which doesn't have castles or museums that are worth seeing. Well, I think we have a few actually, but they're not in Toronto. He met my parents and then got married, and then he obviously works in Dubai, so that's how he went there.
And now you guys have 2 beautiful children.
Yes.
2. You then took a bit of a career pivot and started going more down the route of literature and then eventually fine arts. Tell us about how that transition came to be.
So that transition kind of began in 2020. I talked about this online a little bit. I watched this documentary by Kenneth Clark called Civilizations, and I'd always been interested in drawing and reading, but I wasn't like so much into reading the classics because I had never been properly exposed to them. Canadian education system, I think they purposely show us really horrible books to put us off of reading. Like, they make you read Toni Morrison and then you're just so disgusted by what you read that you just don't want to pick up a book like that again. So I went to school in Canada, and I think that the humanities education that was offered there was not very good. And it, in fact, put people off of literature and art because instead of showing us some of the greatest achievements in the humanities by mankind, showing us novels by Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Charles Dickens or Thomas Hardy, showed us, yes, we had a few Shakespeare plays, but I think that was, part of the saving grace of it. But mostly it was modernist novels. We read like Life of Pi, Toni Morrison's Beloved. We read, oh my gosh, there's like Forgettable. Like I don't even remember the titles, but I remember being utterly either I was disgusted while I was reading them or I was bored. And so I was not really interested in the humanities that much when I was in high school. So I went into STEM, and I still love science and learning about our world. But it wasn't until I was in my early 20s and already in a master's program for neuroscience that I started to rekindle my love for literature and art because I finally had that breathing room of time. Like grad students actually have a lot more time than undergrads or pre-med students to actually have hobbies outside of their classes. So that was the first time I actually got some breathing space to read. And I started to read Dostoevsky, and I was like, wow, how come I was never shown this book in my entire life? And I found it because of Jordan Peterson. Actually, a lot of people found Dostoevsky because of him.
Yeah.
And from there, I just started reading everything I could get my hands on, and I was led by my own instinct. So I was really thankful that I had never studied the humanities formally because I was then pulled by beauty and virtue and goodness and skill in writing rather than in what would impress a humanities professor in this modern age. And then I was drawn to the art. So I started an art club on my Instagram where I was like, okay, just join me and we'll just look at a beautiful painting I found this week together and we'll talk about it. And so I did that for about 2 years. I ran an art club online, and I had hundreds of people join, which I was really surprised by. Like, I'm not even an art history expert. They're all joining. And a lot of them said it was a reprieve from their daily life to just come and look at something beautiful. And that's when I started to realize how valuable beauty is in people's lives and how much it can offer them a reprieve from life and even give them some kind of hope or optimism. And it was even affecting me. So, I studied painters and artists that would never be taught to any art history student today because the institutional agenda is very different to what actually merits being studied. So, for example, and most people know who Picasso is. Most people know who Van Gogh is. When you go to buy art themed things, you can find like a water bottle with a Van Gogh painting on it. And yet very few people know who Joaquin Sorolla is or who Gaston Latouche is. And these artists, when you look at their work, you forget all about Van Gogh and Picasso because their work is so beautiful, so captivating. The light, the humanity, it's not just about realism. Like that's what many of the modernist artists say, like, oh, these are just realistic painters and they don't have any relevance anymore because of the camera. But when you actually look at the paintings yourself, you realize that that's just a cope, as we say. It doesn't have any bearing in reality because these paintings are clearly far more than just realism. They're there's something of a story that they capture and respect and dignify that modernist artists fail to do. And I think so I went down all these rabbit holes of how that happened, why it happened, who were the characters involved, what changed. And it was like I was giving myself an arts education. And then I met my husband, and it was just like fate handed me the PhD mentor that I always wanted, because he's got a first in Oxford from history, is studying history, and he's studied the arts like his whole education. And so when I'm reading a book now, like I'm really into ancient Greece these days and studying Homer. So when I have questions, I just ask him. He's already studied everything.
A built-in tutor. That's perfect. I agree, especially when you use your Dostoevsky example. You could simultaneously write notes from underground and yet continue to believe in the absolute necessity of beauty. And so when you can write, it's almost what Soren Kierkegaard took the approach of Christian existentialism, which was different from the atheistic existentialists that we had been used to seeing in philosophy up until that point. And because he was able to peer through a very specific, fine-tuned lens and deal with those existential terrors, yet remain a devout Christian, we received something akin to the prophetic, right? We look at social media today and we say Kierkegaard wrote about this in 1846. This was absolutely on his radar, almost prophetically. And so I agree with you when we go so far into realism with so many of these artists, and especially when you look into their personal lives, what they were subscribing to at the time, the horror of giving themselves over to lesser things weaves its way very often into their art. And so if you don't provide yourself a comparative analysis, you too stand to forget what beauty is and to become lost. And I think as a mother, beauty, when we're teaching our children, it's training and perception. We train their perception. We're very attuned to weaving in context for our children. They will ask a simple question, and I'm a tangent mom myself, which I think just enriches the conversation with a kid. You start to weave in relevant information, and it can help orient a child without continuing to confuse them, without providing proper context. And so we start to see I start to see that in a lot of your writing. There's implications involved. There's let's not forget this. And you do a great job at weaving together competing evidence to prove perhaps a new point with what people are no longer looking. I would say in higher education is a certain gifting you have. I want to talk actually both about some of your Substack writing and then some of your more literary and fine arts education initiatives that you have for small children now as a mother. First, I'd love to discuss one of your recent essays that you wrote on your Substack called Do You Have Any Peers? So can you tell us a bit about the distinctions you make between peers and competitors and followers?
So glad you brought that up, because that essay was a culmination of a personal realization that I made and a personal maturation that I experienced. And for all of the anti-aging talk that is online these days for women, this is one of the perks of aging, which is that there are some lessons that you only earn through time, and this was one of them. And so if someone can understand this lesson and they're younger than me, then they were far richer. So social media has a knack for bringing out the most immature aspects of us, and so we have to be aware of that. And one immature aspect is that you evaluate the people in front of you as either competitors or as followers. And it's almost engineered that way. So if someone's not a sycophantic follower of yours, agreeing with everything you say, then they are a competitor who's either doing similar things as you, or they are doing the opposite thing to you. So they're competing with you in some way. And both of these types of relationships, follower, competitor, are not conducive to helping you grow, and they're not what you need as a young person, especially because what a young person needs are two things: peers and mentors. And mentorship is something that we all kind of intuitively understand very easily because of the way the school system is constructed where you have a teacher and you have students. But the peer relationship is one that is often neglected because of, once again, the school system structure such that the people who are your classmates, you're not actually helping each other to learn. You're competing with each other for university spots or scholarship spots. And that's one thing I find very tragic because when I'm now doing this autodidactic arc of my life where I'm, learning things on my own for fun, for the love of it.
Which
Um,
is increasingly popular. We see that, thank God.
yeah.
Because I think
Yeah.
people know what they're not receiving.
Yeah.
There's something
And
else.
And I think that in this space, I'm feeling that I'm actually learning so much from people who are also doing the same things as me, who are my peers. And I've found that, when I used to like, when you have young children, you can't stick to live schedules for things very often. So that's why I'm not doing art club. I used to have a book club and it was really difficult to keep it going because with children, with especially children under 5, your schedule is more run by them. No matter how careful you are about setting up routines, you definitely have a schedule ran by your children.
They are built for dependency, yes.
Yeah, but when I had book clubs or art clubs or anything, I found that I was learning so much from the people with me there. It wasn't just, I know everything and I'm telling you what I know about. It was more of a discussion. So my "Do you have any peers" essay is about inviting people to evaluate how they're spending their time online. Are they cultivating relationships that will nurture them or will sabotage them and keep them stunted in this immature phase of being 22 forever, where you're constantly trying to one up each other, or you're constantly trying to just gain followers that you look down on, um, and you don't learn anything from, or you don't respect them. There might be just a funnel for you to get money somehow, maybe if you're selling something to them. And I think that people are increasingly starting to recognize this as the smart people are being more cognizant of their screen time and who they're following and what their social media diet is. If they can detect that someone they're following doesn't respect them, then they just won't engage with it. So yeah, so that essay was about inviting the readers to evaluate the kinds of relationships they're building online. And I think that the peer relationship is one that is very challenging to build because it requires a measure of humility, to recognize that someone could be doing as well as you or better than you and has something they can teach you. And you have something they can teach them, and you can respectfully disagree or respectfully learn from each other and help each other grow. And that's how you actually solve the bigger problems of the world. There's so many people who get very enraged by political movements online, and they have no plan on how they plan to enact any kind of solution other than raise awareness, which we all know is just an empty phrase. Instead, if they build peer relationships and relationships between people who are solving one problem in multiple different ways, then you can actually enact really powerful cultural change.
I went to see Jordan Peterson speak once. He was reasoning through a potential point where he said, I'm not convinced that you shouldn't have to pay something, some sort of fee before posting on social media. Putting a pin in that line of questioning that he had for a moment, I do see where the free version of social media can serve as a great bridge. I mean, algorithmically, that's how I found your content. That's how I found a lot of our guests' content. And the conversations are so thrilling for me because I see this content and then I actually get to talk to the person whose thought process is behind that. And then like I said, algorithmically, it just leads you down certain paths and then you can be exposed to certain similar things, hopefully to have unto content that you continue to admire and learn from and does inspire you to continue to get better, hone your craft, hone your thinking processes, sophisticate your line of thinking. And that is very exciting component of being able to be online. I do see where that can only, if you want substantial growth from that, that can only be a bridge because a lot of times, for lack of a better term, creators will pour so much into their craft that they will inevitably create, say, like a Substack account where they will pour in their content, everything that they're learning, they're pulling this evidence together, they're building these essays, they're building their research. And I do think I see social media going into a direction where the free version of it can serve still as a bridge unto that more exclusive content. But if you remain only in these free spaces, you are so subjected to the slop that comes with these comment sections. And I don't know if for long that a lot of people who are really seeking to learn and to really engage with competitive ideas are going to only stay in those free spaces. That these subscription based platforms are going to only continue to erupt in popularity, in my opinion, as they should. I have had teachers for a long time that sell their intellect, or lack of a better phrase. No, they make their intellect available for consumption. And I'm not offended by the paywall associated with that. That takes a tremendous amount of work and research to provide that. And so, they'll provide some of this for free. And of course, the invitation stands to continue to engage with this content on a different level. I could see where we are going to have to and help our children make increasingly sophisticated decisions about how to engage with social media, especially on these more free platforms, where not only is it rife with a lot of slop, but it's restrictive on a lot of the ideas. We saw a lot of this a few years ago. It's restrictive on a lot of the ideas and discussions that are even permissible to be shared on these platforms. Very easily people get canceled, they're demonetized, they're removed without explanation and certainly without resolution. So I agree with where you're going with that. I want to move on. I want to move on to your new children's book. Tell us about how you bridge your writing from some of these more sophisticated elements of your research to making this accessible for families and children while not sacrificing qualities. That I'm very much looking forward to after reading some of your or watching some of your commentary on that.
I started making children's books. So this has been like a 3-year process for me. I will say, like, from the beginning of my first pregnancy, I started to, when you first get pregnant, you want to buy all these things for your baby, you're excited. And I went to the children's section, and that was the first time I paid attention to children's books. And I was so disappointed and angry at what was available for children. And I thought, like, what are they doing? This is
Oh,
horrible.
it's dull and it's boring.
It's so badly drawn, it's so badly written. And then I decided, well, I can certainly draw better than this. Not right now, but in a couple years' time.
Right.
So so during my pregnancies, one of the ways that I kept my mind active was I took these fine art classes online, and I took them from a private atelier. So it's called New Masters Academy, but they're part of this kind of global conspiracy, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this one is true. There's a global conspiracy involved where these artists who are disenchanted and angry with the mainstream fine arts education have broken away from these mainstream universities and schools to set up their own private ateliers that are teaching fine art in the old way, like old masters. And so they're all over the world. This is just one of them, run by Mr. Joshua Jacobo, I think is his first name. There's people who run private ateliers in Toronto that I visited. There's one in Florence, this not too far from here. Over time, gained the skills to illustrate books properly. I had to learn everything from anatomy to composition, shapes, light, value, texture. I experimented with different mediums to see which one best suited both my temperament and also my flexibility needs as a mother, because I can't have a full studio set up all the time, and I can't have stuff in reach of children right now. So I went for watercolor because it's like the kit is this small and it can easily be put away. And you need I use like 3 paintbrushes. And
About all you can do. We lost, let's see, what did we lose this week? An entire jar of honey, an entire bottle of almond extract. Thank God no one drank that. Yeah, you just can't have things within reach. They're very
yeah.
curious. Very curious.
So I was really influenced in the writing as well, because I felt something was wrong about the way that children's books are written as well, because they are just so you feel bored as an adult reading it, and you think, "Oh, maybe it's because I'm an adult and I have to be patient with a child," kind of like how you walk slowly when the child is a toddler, because obviously toddlers can't walk that fast, so maybe it's something like that. But I could tell there's something off about it because and then my mother-in-law gave me a bunch of children's books that she had from when my husband was a baby, and oh my gosh, they were so beautiful. They were so beautifully written. They were so beautifully illustrated. The language. So that's how I discovered Beatrix Potter, who is a treasure of England. And but she's from the Lake District, and she wrote the famous story of Peter Rabbit, but she has several other ones. Like the writing in these stories is something that would challenge and baffle a ninth grade student today in public school because of how far literacy standards have fallen. And I think that these books are partly to blame, or in large part to blame, for this fall in literary standards. And I learned a new word. Did you know what the word soporific means? It's like when you eat so much that you feel sleepy. That's a word I learned from The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter, which is aimed at toddlers. So that's when I realized that. And then I started watching interviews of kids from before the 1950s. I started reading, I like scoured for like letters that were written by children because, of course, letter writing was so common before the telephone. And I found letters written by 10, 11-year-olds that far exceed what 25-year-olds come up with on their Substack posts today. And then it dawned on me that it's not that children are dumb and they need like, 3-word sentences for like, a 2-year-old's book. It's that we have just constantly kept lowering our standards because it's cheaper to push out these books that way. You don't have to pay a writer if you don't have good writing. You don't have to pay an artist if you don't have good art. You can churn out in volume. These publishing companies control the distribution networks, they control the bookshops, and they control the printing presses. They all conglomerated in the 1980s. That's not a coincidence because books pre-1980 were still quite good.
Right.
There's Judith Kerr, like The Tiger Who Came to Tea. There's Janet and Alan Alberg and The Jolly Postman. There's Curious George. There's Mary Poppins. Elsa Bisko from Sweden. And 1980 was like the point when the shift really happened and all of these books started to be seriously dumbed down. These publishing companies lobbied the government to introduce rules about reading levels because they said, oh, pedagogically speaking, children need reading levels to learn how to read. And that helped them because then they could publish books. They took well-loved stories like Peter Pan or Mary Poppins or Treasure Island, cut up the story, abridged it in like the most horrible vandalism possible to rip all of the magic, quality, excellence out of the story. Just take the basic plot. Even stories like Little Red Riding Hood, you'll notice if they were written in 1960 versus 1990, the difference is tragic because the writing is such poor quality now compared to before. And they cut them up into reading levels, and then the schools had to have a certain number of books for each reading level available in the library. Instant profit for these publishing companies. This is like, the deep dive that I did before. And then I also discovered Charlotte Mason, who talked about the harms of twaddle on children. And twaddle is a word, if you're not familiar with it, it just means writing that insults the reader. And I think there's a lot of that everywhere these days, online, Substack, not just in the printed books in the bookshops. And she said, she said that exposing your child to twaddle is worse than not reading anything at all. Because at least if they're not reading, they're playing, which is at least healthy for them. And I found a lot of people who push reading and literacy for children, even online. There's this woman named Hannah Ward, and there's several others. They said, it doesn't matter what a child's reading as long as they're reading. I just found that was so crazy. It's like, it doesn't matter what you're eating as long as you're eating.
We need to pull up. There's a clip recently of like a teacher chanting with her class of it doesn't have to something like it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done, and, like, that's a horrible aim.
I've seen that one. I commented on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And poor Charlotte Mason is so misrepresented with aesthetic homeschooling. That is, I'm going to be a little harsh for a minute. It's Instagram accounts that are seeking to earn money off of the marketing of homeschooling, the aesthetics of homeschooling, while extracting a, we'll be generous with this term, highly abridged version of what Charlotte Mason's aim was with the education in the home and then selling it as accessible, but really it's a very consumer based projection of what homeschooling under a so-called Charlotte Mason umbrella would look like. I mean, Charlotte Mason actually placed an unbelievable amount of emphasis on the mother's education.
Yes. That's why I loved I'm I'm,
Outpour.
like, keeping this bottled up right now, but I'm a huge Charlotte Mason fangirl. It just, like,
Right.
spoke to me.
Yes, well, and it's an outpouring from the mother because if you look at what a mother is to her children, she's this depth of perception. And if she continues to deepen her perception, if she continues to care for her mind, her spirit, her brain, her evolution as a person, as a complex creature of process, the children will gather under her like a large oak tree and they will bask in it. And then they will continue to explore in this sort of secure way under proper oversight from a mother who's constantly helping them curate taste, which I know is something you
Yes.
discuss, is a curation of taste in the home. Tell us a bit about that in
Yes.
parenting.
I love that you brought up Charlotte Mason and gave me free rein to like just go off on this because there's so much I learned from her. If I could just in a snapshot capture like what did Charlotte Mason want parents to do, I would say like in one line it would be send them outside in nature. Like the one line that I made major takeaway, and that was one thing that I really worked hard on is making, even when I lived in Dubai when where nature is harder to come by, made sure that they got enough oxygen, fresh air, contact with real nature so that they could make real observations with their own senses and learn from that. And that's just one thing I would like to add about Charlotte Mason. So what about the mother's education, I so loved that aspect of Charlotte Mason because that's already the kind of person that I am. I just love learning. And when you love something, it just pours out of you into everybody around you. You can't help but share it. So I think that cultivating, if you're trying to, I'm not a person who thinks that homeschooling is best in all contexts for all families. I do disagree about that with many homeschool people. However, I think if you are inclined to homeschool, you have to at least love learning yourself because if you don't, you're going to have a very hard time. And a love of learning, if you don't have it, it is actually a moral deficit. I think that's like a character flaw because if you don't love learning, like what are you doing with your time, with your mind throughout the day? Are you gossiping? Are you like judging people? Are you just looking at your reflection? Like even if you're doing chores, right? You might come up with a question in your mind and be curious about something like you're brewing coffee for yourself in the day. Why does coffee need to be brewed? Why can't you just what is happening to the actual coffee grounds? That they're not clearly not just dissolving in the water or it would work in cold water. What is the boiling actually doing to the grounds? What is this magical process? So that's a question that if you're someone who loves learning, that question erupts in your mind and then you have a desire to answer it. And in the past, you'd have to take out like a chemistry book or like find somebody who knows about this. But now there's no excuse at all. You can just look it up. Or if you watch the leaves changing color, why do the leaves change color? What's actually happening inside the leaf? What's happening inside the tree? Why are some leaves purple and some red? And these are very childlike qualities in a way, but they're not childlike in that they're immature. They're childlike in that they're innocent. And in that innocence, they reflect a closeness to God, I would say. Um, and you come to love the world also when you have a love of learning because you realize that the world is wonderful and its people are good and worthy of being redeemed. And you develop this love for the world and that affects everything else that you do. So I think if you're someone who doesn't like learning, then you have to reflect on why that is and what you're doing instead of that and correct it. in my humble opinion.
It is. I think one of the first scriptures my husband told me was one of his favorites is actually quite terrifying. I don't know why he picked this one on like our second date, but he did. And actually, it's quite telling. And it's one of my favorite things about him, which is the scripture about the millstone. It's better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea rather than to lead these little ones astray. And it's a terrifying scripture, right? And you think of it conventionally speaking, right? If you lead a child astray from the faith, but I also think you can do that. You can lead them astray from good inquiry. And it's going the brilliant uniqueness of motherhood does come out with your love of learning. I doubt that every mother loves learning all things, but there's going to be a unique flavor to your home when your kids need to see this very Jesuit principle of restless inquiry. They've got to see you contend to strenuous thought, strenuous research in pursuit of that which is meaningful, which you can then deliver back to your family, help translate for them to contribute to the dinner table. Dinner tables are much more campfire settings than anything else. It's a contribution, it's a pouring in, it's a confrontation of what you've brought to the table. And then you're reasoning through it. Actually, just today, I was walking, my oldest is 7, and we were walking and we were just talking about certain things. And of all things, I brought up to him that my 4-year-old wanted to watch the cartoon Scooby Doo the other day, and so I allowed it for a minute. And then as I'm listening in, I noticed that this, if you're familiar with Scooby Doo, it's this band of teenagers that and it's been around since either the 70s or so. That the purpose of their gang is to they're called in to sniff out wrongdoing and unmask what is never amounts to be a true folklore monster, but it's usually someone who's expressing some sort of greed or dishonesty, theft, things like that. And that is about the synopsis of every episode of the show. Well, they decided to change all of that. And the one character is seen over associating herself with the villain. And she gives this postmodern thought monologue, straight faced, about there is no right and wrong. There are only competing choices. There is no good and evil. So obviously we turn that off. And so I was discussing with my 7-year-old and on a walk out in nature today. And it actually led to some pretty interesting places in his line of thought and what he thought was so horrifying about that sentiment. And I think it grows in complexity over time. So you love hearing how their analyses come together and they kind of wrestle with these principles. But ultimately, we landed in a place of, okay, so what does that mean? Is you have to aim up. Because he said something about, I loved his line of reasoning. He said, if there is no good and evil, why would we get up every day and do anything at all? And of course, in his 7-year-old mind, he goes, why wouldn't I just watch TV all day? There's nothing good to aim at. And I said, well, right, you would consume more than you would expel energy that is not natural to give. Right. You wouldn't fight against gravity. You wouldn't fight against any friction. You would have no meaning to do that because suffering would have no meaning for you.
He did was very interesting in terms of a logical practice, which is just take a principle and pull it to its extremes, and you'll like 9 times out of 10 you solve the problem. Like for example, if your purpose in life, someone might say it's for pleasure, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain. And then they say like, oh, you can measure pleasure and pain by this and this neurotransmitter. Okay. That neurotransmitter is not measuring pain. It's a measure of pain or pleasure. It's an effect, not a cause. So the causal directionality is something people often presume. But nevertheless, let's say your aim in life is to maximize your pleasure. The only way to maximize your pleasure is to be constantly high on heroin all day. And there are people who are like that. They're constantly high on heroin all day. You can go to LA and see them anytime. And those people are some of the most miserable people on earth. But their brain scans will tell you they're extremely happy because they've got maximum dopamine. So then this is why I had to leave neuroscience, by the way, because these are materialists trying to study the mind, which is immaterial. And so then you come to the realization that joy and pleasure are separate things. And to maximize your joy is not something you can do on your own because joy is actually a gift of the Holy Spirit. And it's not something you can manufacture. You can't brew a potion. You can't earn it by doing this and this task. It's a gift, and you can attain that gift when you are acting like it. It's like attracts like. If you act like kind of like similar to a kindred spirit to the Holy Spirit, then this is my understanding of it, then that joy will come to you. That explains how people who are in objectively painful situations, they're in war zones, they're in poverty, they've got really difficult life circumstances, diseases, and yet you will find those people have joy that the heroin addicts don't. So clearly joy is immaterial because it's not linked even directionally to physical pleasure. And so then you realize that those people can often have joy despite their physical circumstances because of the way that their spirit moves in the world, the way that they treat other people, the way that they talk to themselves, the hopes that they have. All of these things, they're not delusions. It's because they have a correct, aligned understanding of right and wrong, of virtue and vice, of how we ought to live in the world and how we ought to be. And it's not that they've earned joy, it's that they're behaving similar to it.
That's I find it completely non-coincidental that what is often prescribed, if you will, outside of medical treatment that may be necessary for those suffering with, say, heroin addiction is a 12-step spiritual program. It's an
Exactly.
attainment joy, and regardless of suffering, which is what we would call the serenity prayer. 'Cause I am who I need to be in any situation, regardless of the circumstances, and I offer this up to a higher purpose. The underbelly of that being to accomplish this, I have relinquished manipulation of my psyche to do that. And so in its place, I have traded the potential for something greater than my own abilities, but also greater than my own current perception to achieve joy in this world, which is a very different approach from the one that is taken when the first drug or drink is taken. It's very, very interesting. And what you said about it's materialists attempting to study the immaterial. And when you don't have that distinction built into the field, that seems incompatible at a certain point.
Yes. And one thing I love about reading old books is that before about 1850, everyone was Christian in the Western world, at least. And that was the default understanding that they worked off of. And so when you even read their scientific papers, not only are they beautifully written, but they are also of sound philosophical logic. And they actually made many discoveries in this way. So think about how many things were discovered: penicillin, eyeglasses, insulin. All of these scientists were religious. The idea
Absolutely.
that science and religion are even the study of genes for the first time was done by a priest. The idea that science and religion are somehow um, counter to each other is so preposterous. Um,
Mm.
and to why I wrote the puffin book because I watched a documentary about puffins with my children. I like watching animal documentaries with them. And we watched one about a puffin, and it was so moving, the story of this little creature. And I thought, why don't they make kids' books like this? Like all the books about animals are so dumb compared to this. And so it's like I did it. And of course, it's not like, I don't have like a lifelong passion for puffins. Maybe I will now, but it was just going from idea to execution is something that very few people allow themselves to do in their lives because an idea is always sparkling and attractive in the beginning when it's an ideal that exists in your head. And then when you actually start executing it, first of all, you realize the skills to do it require so much patience and they're so challenging and they're so hard and they make you feel dumb and incompetent. And then also the idea itself becomes stale and boring to you, so it's no longer sparkly. And that's the point at which a lot of people give up and say, oh, this is just a waste of time. How much money is it even going to make? The market's saturated. Lots of people are doing this. And then those are the excuses they give themselves to quit. So I didn't quit, and I just kept going to complete this project because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see what it would look like if I didn't just complain about these books. I actually made one that I would find acceptable for my child in this day and age. And I made sure to write beautifully, tell a good story, and also have good illustrations. That is what I'm proud of having done. A lot of people complain. I didn't want to just be one of those complainers.
No, it doesn't create anything. What would you say if you could give mothers advice on the top 5 books you think should be on every children's bookshelf in every home? 3 books for ages 3 to 6 years old should be in every parent's bookshelf.
So one of them would be Anne of Green Gables. And you might think, well, that's a chapter book. 3-year-old can't read a chapter book. You'll find that one of the things you find is that you don't want to fall out of love with reading because you have small children who only can, be interested in picture books. And then when you have small children, you have very little time to yourself. You have to kind of engineer your day to carve out 35 minutes to read. And actually, if you're reading something that is not dumb, that is something that challenges you a little bit, you need 35 minutes of undisturbed time when you can actually form one thought to the next. You can have a cup of tea, you can take pauses, consider. And so appreciating the mother in this point, because like as you said so beautifully, it's an outpouring from the mother's education. Anne of Green Gables is one of these kind of books that a mother can read and it'll nourish her. But if she reads it out loud to her children, they're also being exposed to really beautiful language and a really beautiful story. And I think Anne of Green Gables is like on the level of almost prophetic books. There's a lot of points at which, like, when I read it as a child and I read it as an adult, and, I almost cried at some of the scenes. And another book would be Heidi by Johanna Spyri for similar reasons, another chapter book. So it's more for the mother than the child. But the beautiful thing about like a 3-year-old is that they do actually pay attention because they're constantly listening to what you're saying. And so if you actually are reading a chapter book, even if they're just playing with their toys nearby and you're watching them, they are actually picking up on certain details of the story and they will remember them. So it's not like they're not being read to. And a third one, age 3 to 6, it's so hard because there's so many. I'm trying to pick like a picture book for kids, but there's so many of them.
It is a very loaded question. I do apologize for that.
I like Beatrix Potter,
Yep.
and I really like Mog the Cat. Mog the Cat made my children, Mog and the Baby by Judith Kerr made my children laugh a lot.
I haven't heard of that one. I've got to look it up.
Mog and the Baby. Yeah, they just laughed so much at that. Because Mog the Cat is a series by Judith Kerr. She's a British writer. And it's not like, flowery language like you have in Beatrix Potter. It's simpler language, but there's like hidden jokes in there that an adult would understand because they're like puns or irony. But then the actual images have jokes in them. And she kind of understands children's humor in her art. So
Puns are so important. I think puns are such a fun way for education to happen in the home because it requires so much contextual understanding. And so if you go through a few times of explaining things ad nauseum to the kids, they do get quite punny themselves. Thank you so much, Megha, for talking to me today, for walking us through some of both of your history that's both autodidactic and some of your formal education and then the life experience that is so woven into the work you have today. I am thrilled to receive our copy of your new book tomorrow in the mail. Better come on time. But also because you are coming up with a new preschool guide that you've been sharing little snippets of, little teasers of the illustrations that are associated with that, which I would think you were a trained artist. Amazing that you've been able to do some of this through virtual training and some of this self-taught. Incredible. So when do you predict that curriculum releasing?
So I'm projecting to have it done by mid-June at the latest. And so this preschool guide is not anything very elaborate because I know that there's so many guides out there. But when I was looking for my own children, I was feeling a lack because a lot of them were very academically based, like ABCs. And I understand, like you do need that kind of stuff as well for preschoolers to familiarize them with these basics. But there was a lot missing in terms of activities to do with your child when they're that age that you can have fun with them and learn at the same time. And there are so many games, songs, activities that I learned by trial and error and by like, searching blogs and reading books and trying them out. And some of them I just invented because, I was bored and I wanted to do something with my kids. And I think a lot of women in my generation are not raised with a maternal mindset. So when you have your first child, even if you have the best intentions, your child might be like 1 years old or 1.5. And you're like, what do I do with you all day? What do we do together? And then if you're not showing them a screen, you actually, they're playing. Yes, they can play somewhat independently at 1.5, but they do always wanna be in your face. So, what's
Certainly.
something good you could do with them that is gonna help them learn and it's gonna tend the soil, as Charlotte Mason would say, to prepare
Right.
for learning. And so I put together just like, a 12-week guide with activities. So each week has a theme that has activities and games and songs associated. And a lot of them are really well-known stuff. So it's more of a curation of all the best stuff that I've put together. So if a mom's really struggling, she's having a hard day, like she doesn't know what to do with her kids, she can just open up the guide and be like, oh, let's do this today.
Have
You know?
something to go off of. Well, I am thrilled to continue to watch your work as it develops and as you create these products for families. It's fascinating. So we will link Mega's Substack, her social media, and everything in the description of this episode so you can follow along. Thank you, everyone, for listening. On Rebranding Motherhood, we talk about the lie that motherhood is a trap and that if you are in a situation where you need support, then no one will be there to help you or to be a steady voice for you. I want to talk to you about our Project Loveline that decimates that lie and helps women get real help in real time. We connect women with resources, or if we can't find one, we become the resource. So if someone you know, needs to access our hotline, you can visit us at loveline.com. And if you want to volunteer, if you want to be that steady voice in someone's life, we would love to talk to you about your heart for helping mothers. Thank you.